all of your experience right now, wherever you might be, what your perceptions, what you see, what you hear, all of that. All this exists within you. And I'm not talking now about a sort of advanced sounding spiritual concept necessarily, or the way this is often, I think, spoken about, but in something more close to the ground. It exists within you. These are all potentials within your psyche, right? Within you means within your own psyche. Now, what a psyche is an immense question, how far it extends. We have one idea of the psyche just sort of ends between your two ears, and it doesn't extend beyond that. But of course, our psyche is what's interacting with the world all the time, and our senses, and everything we see from the wall in front of you or the whatever's above and below you. All that is existing in our minds. I don't mean that there's nothing out there. Right? I'm not saying whether there is or isn't. That's not an important point right now. What really is important is not a philosophical point, but something a bit more experiential. It might sound philosophical, but it's much more experiential, which is whatever we see, right? We're seeing the way our mind is interpreting the data that's coming in through our senses, through our eyes, through our ears, all the rest of the senses. All of it's coming in, and then it's being interpreted and arranged, and all of a sudden you see a wall in front of you, or a computer screen, or a ceiling above you, or a ground underfoot, or whatever we see. This is our interpretation of what our senses are taking in. Right? So it's not like we're just looking out through when you look out through your window at home and you just see, well, I'm looking out the window and that's what's there. It's more like that's what's there for a human being perceiving the way human beings perceive. A different being, a different life form, a different animal walking on the planet can and does see things quite differently than you and I. So even on that sort of fairly rudimentary level, it's all within us. What we see, what we hear, if we imagine that our senses are picking up sort of unadulterated, like they're just taking in the world, but that's not how it works. We take in the sense perception, and that sense perception is interpreted, and the images are actually created in our brains. This isn't really spirituality per se. This is just sort of brain science. It's at this point, it's fairly that part of it anyway is fairly straightforward. There's an immense amount that's not understood, but. So even at this level, we can start at this level, that we're all experiencing what we're experiencing right now, our visual field, our auditory field, everything. And in a very real sense, that is those perceptions are originating from within us, from within our brain, from within our mind. They're not originating out there. Whatever is out there, if there is an out there, is something that we're interacting with. And then we create the perception and the experience of it. That's why in some traditions they'll say things like, there's only mind. The whole world exists within you, within your mind. And we can think that like that's some far-flung, out there spiritual concept. But nowadays we know, no, it's actually not a far-flung spiritual concept. It's also pretty demonstratable brain science. So, and I don't say that to you just as like information, just to convey something that's kind of fascinating, but I think this can go into our own practice. we see something not quite the same because it's not taking in the same perceptions through our eyes and ears and stuff like that. But when we're looking at ourselves, into ourselves, right? Look within, the old ancient suggestion goes. Look within, find out who you are, right? Self-discovery in its deepest sense has always been sort of the core, through different ways of languaging it, but of most deep contemplative systems. Do you know? And that's the mysterious aspect of all this. And it really is, when you kind of get hooked on the mysterious, if you're looking deeply enough to get kind of not mesmerized, but enchanted with the mysteriousness of our whole experience. In one sense, it seems quite ordinary because we've just been moving through the world experiencing it whatever way we do, and so that seems quite ordinary. And then, somewhere along the line, we start to realize, well, everybody doesn't perceive the world the way I do. They don't think about it the same way. They don't feel about it the same way. It's the way people think and feel about, well, anything really is just immensely diverse. So, in the spiritual search, the nut we're trying to crack, the mystery we're trying to really open up, to have revealed to us. Because in many ways it is the greatest mystery of all. It's the mystery of our own being. And what we encounter along the way are all the preconceived ideas that we've acquired through our lifetime up till this moment. And those preconceptions can just be very abstract judgments, ideas, opinions. They can be, and often are, linked back into memory, right? And that will derive more opinions and ideas and life experience through that. And I think one of the things that's confusing to a lot of people is, you take a teaching, I teach this, take Buddha, really articulated it quite well with his doctrine of no self. But I think there's been maybe no more misunderstood doctrine than the doctrine of no self as the Buddha was talking about it. The Buddha wasn't suggesting that there isn't any appearance of self. Everybody has an appearance of self. I mean, even internally, inside of you, right? So it's not like you're walking along, you have whoever yourself, or you imagine yourself to be, you know? And when the Buddha said no self, he wasn't denying that we have this sort of, I call it a psychological self, this self that's kind of created totally in our psychology. Of course, it derives its extra identity from our personality and even our physical makeup and history and all sorts of things. So when the Buddha is saying no self, it's not, at the end of the day, simply a philosophical statement or a theological statement. There is no self, actually. If we really get into what he was trying to get at, I think, was there is a sort of psychological self. I've just described that, derived from memory and ideas and projections and personality and all the rest. That's there. But what he's saying is I was going to say it's illusory, which in a sense it is illusory, but I'm trying to get at something more visceral than that, you know, like it's almost like our idea of ourself, because it's not just an idea, is it? It's also felt and sensed and most people, it's quite, calcified. But when we really look into it, and when I say look into it, I literally mean look. That's kind of what meditation is. It's a kind of inward vision. It's an inward looking instead of thinking about or analyzing. Look first. Because if we don't get our looking or our perception really clear, then, geez, what chance do our interpretations have of being even remotely aligned with truth? So, there can be that psychological self. And the Buddha is saying, when we really look into it, when we meditate upon it, when we try to find specifically what exactly is the self within all this, within all these memories and these ideas and this personality and, all the idiosyncrasies that you have as a particular human being, right? And so if we just kind of preemptively go, well, the Buddha said there's no self, or Adya says there's no self, so okay, there's no self, then we've kind of robbed ourselves of the exploration of the actual lived experience, right? Because it's not just a denial of self. That's a very, not even a rudimentary understanding necessarily, but I understand it. But it's saying this thing that feels like you and you've believed in you, and whether all that it is actually, when you look at it and you go, where is the self in it? What is the me in this? You look for something specific, let's say, or particular, right? And the interesting thing is, the more we look for ourselves as something or someone in particular, if we do it in a deep enough way, we keep kind of coming up empty-handed. You're like, where am I in this? I started out believing in me, right? Believing that the me you had in your mind was the real you. And then you look at it really clearly, kind of meditatively, quietly. Where is the self in it? Where is me? And we start to realize that the me, or the self, in all of this psychological material, let's say, is kind of an inference. That it's not something we can tangibly grasp